Racist cop attacks black woman, but her diplomatic protection saves the day. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident that highlights the deep-seated racial issues still prevalent in society. A black woman becomes the target of an unprovoked and aggressive attack by a police officer. This disturbing confrontation underscores the systemic racism that continues to affect countless lives. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives. Stories.
It was supposed to be a peaceful morning jog, the kind that clears the mind and prepares you for the day ahead. But as she laced up her sneakers and stepped into the quiet suburban park, she had no idea her presence would trigger something so ugly, so unnecessary, that it would leave her questioning the very system she had dedicated her life to. "Hey, you." "Yeah, I'm talking to you," the voice barked from across the path. A tall, burly police officer in a crisp uniform stomped toward her, sunglasses perched low on his nose, his expression dripping with disdain. "What are you doing here?" Her heartbeat quickened, but not from the jog. She'd been here 100 times before. It was a public park, anyone could be here. She didn't respond immediately, unsure if she should engage. "You deaf or just ignoring me?" His tone sharpened, and his presence loomed closer. People around them stopped, eyes darting between the officer and the woman standing her ground. The morning air grew thick with tension. "I'm just running," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "Is there a problem?" "A problem?" He let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, there's a problem. You don't belong here." The words hit harder than she expected, each syllable drenched in a venom that felt all too familiar. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but calm, her hands steady at her sides. She could feel the eyes on her now, strangers who didn't intervene, who didn't question. "You heard me," he spat, stepping closer, invading her space. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this park. You match the description." Suspicious activity. She knew exactly what that meant. Her skin prickled under the weight of his gaze. "You mean jogging?" she asked, her tone sharpening. The officer's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me. ID, now." She reached for her phone instead. "I'll record this, thanks." That's when the shift happened. His hand darted forward, knocking the phone to the ground, the crash silencing the murmurs of the small crowd gathering nearby. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're nobody." His voice boomed as he raised his leg, preparing to kick her phone, or maybe worse. Time slowed. But before his boot met its mark, she moved. Swiftly, precisely. Grabbing his foot mid-air, she twisted sharply, sending him off balance and stumbling back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officer's face turned a deep shade of crimson as he scrambled to his feet. "You're under arrest," he shouted, reaching for his cuffs. She stood firm, pulling out her badge with the ease of someone who'd done it countless times before. "No," she said, her voice cold, controlled, and unwavering. "You are." The color drained from his face as his eyes locked on the emblem of authority she held. What is this?" "I'm an FBI agent," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "And you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." Silence fell over the park, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The tables had turned in an instant. The officer, moments ago brimming with arrogance, now stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The humiliation he had tried to impose on her was nothing compared to what was coming. Because she wasn't just any agent. She had the power, the evidence, and the determination to expose the rot festering beneath the surface. What led this man to act with such blatant disregard for decency? And how would the system he so confidently abused react when confronted with someone who refused to stay silent? What happens next is a story of resilience, justice, and an extraordinary reckoning that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about accountability. Stay tuned, because this is one showdown you won't want to miss. At Plough of Twist, we stand firmly against all forms of racism, discrimination, and prejudice. To every black viewer watching this, know that your voice matters, your experiences matter, and you are deeply valued. This channel is a safe space where stories seek justice, celebrate resilience, and inspire change. Now, let's dive into a powerful and gripping story that reminds us of the strength in standing up for what's right. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to support these impactful narratives. Enjoy the story, and thank you for being here. The crisp morning air carried a faint scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth, the kind of atmosphere that invited solace and reflection. It was the one part of her day where she could escape the chaos of her career, the relentless pace, and the endless expectations. Special Agent Maya Carter had developed a habit of running at dawn, her way of clearing her mind before diving into the demands of her job at the FBI. She had chosen this park intentionally, a quiet suburban retreat just outside Atlanta, where the only sounds were chirping birds and the rhythmic pound of her sneakers against the trail. Maya, in her mid-30s, was a striking figure of strength and resilience. Her tall, athletic frame was a testament to years of training, but it was her eyes, sharp, alert, and unwavering, that revealed the core of who she was. Growing up in a modest home in Birmingham, Alabama, she had learned early on what it meant to fight for space, respect, and opportunities in a world determined to underestimate her. Her parents, both civil rights advocates, had instilled in her an unshakable sense of justice. This sense was what propelled her through college, the grueling Quantico training, and into the elite ranks of the Bureau. Maya's career was her pride, but it came with sacrifices. Her long hours left little time for relationships, and though she maintained a close bond with her family, there were moments she felt the weight of isolation. The world she navigated wasn't always welcoming to someone like her, a black woman in an overwhelmingly white, male-dominated field. But Maya didn't ask for acceptance. She demanded respect, and her reputation as a relentless and fair investigator preceded her. The suburban park she frequented was a deliberate choice. It was far enough from her downtown apartment to feel like a getaway, and it offered a quiet space to collect her thoughts. The park itself was sprawling, with winding trails flanked by towering oaks and clusters of azaleas in bloom. At its heart was a modest lake, its surface glassy and still in the morning light. It wasn't uncommon for locals to greet one another with nods or small waves, but Maya preferred to stay in her lane, focused on her run. This morning felt no different, at least at first. She stretched near her car, adjusting her earbuds and tying her laces with the precision of someone who thrived on routine. She noticed a few regulars on the trail, an elderly couple walking their golden retriever, a young woman pushing a stroller, and a middle-aged man doing lunges near the picnic area. Familiar faces in an otherwise unfamiliar town. Maya had moved to Atlanta a year ago, transferring to a regional FBI field office after wrapping up a lengthy assignment in New York. The move was meant to give her some breathing room, a chance to recalibrate after the intensity of her last case. But even in a city like Atlanta, with its rich black culture and history, there were reminders that racism didn't need an invitation to show up unannounced. One such reminder was Officer Greg Harding. Harding was a veteran of the local police force, a man in his late 40s with a stocky build, a perpetual scowl, and an ego as large as his jurisdiction. For Greg, the badge wasn't just a symbol of authority, it was a shield for his prejudices. Growing up in a small, predominantly white town in Georgia, Harding had been raised in an environment steeped in us versus them rhetoric. Joining the police force seemed inevitable for someone like him, and over the years, he climbed the ranks, unchecked by a system that rarely scrutinized men like him. But Greg wasn't entirely immune to consequences. Recent complaints about his behavior, racial profiling, excessive force, and condescending remarks, had put him under scrutiny. The department's higher-ups had issued warnings, but they were perfunctory at best. Greg knew how to toe the line, pushing boundaries without crossing them blatantly enough to face real repercussions. He resented the oversight, viewing it as an attack on his authority. This morning, Greg was patrolling near the park, sitting in his cruiser with a cup of coffee in a simmering irritation. His personal life was in shambles, a messy divorce and a strained relationship with his teenage son only added fuel to the fire of his discontent. He didn't like this part of town, didn't trust the types of people who frequented the park. When his radio crackled with a report of a suspicious individual matching a vague description, black female, mid-30s, athletic build, Greg perked up. He didn't need much to act on. He'd find someone who fit the bill, he always did. Maya, oblivious to Greg's presence, started her jog. The rhythmic cadence of her steps and the steady beat of her music provided a momentary escape. She followed the trail past the lake, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to release. She didn't notice the police cruiser parked just beyond the trees, nor the way Greg's gaze locked onto her as she passed. Harding stepped out of his vehicle, adjusting his belt as he watched her. His boots crunched against the gravel path as he approached, his hand already resting on his radio. Maya felt him before she saw him, a shift in the energy around her, the kind that made her instincts sharpen. She slowed her pace, pulling out one earbud as she turned to face him. "Ma'am," he called out, his tone curt and authoritative. "Hold up a second." Maya frowned, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with caution. Greg sized her up, his lips curling into a smirk. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Her eyebrows knit together in confusion. "I'm running," she said, gesturing to her attire. "Like everyone else here." "Is that right?" he said, taking a step closer. "You got ID on you?" Maya blinked, taken aback. "ID? For jogging in a public park?" "Don't get smart with me," Greg snapped. "Just show me your ID, and we won't have a problem." The exchange drew the attention of a few bystanders, their eyes darting between the officer and the jogger. Maya felt the weight of their stares but kept her composure. "Officer, I'm not required to carry ID while running," she said firmly. "Is there a reason you're singling me out?" Greg's face hardened. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone like her. "Look," he said, his voice lowering but losing none of its edge, "you can cooperate, or I can make this a lot harder for you." Maya's jaw tightened. She had faced this kind of treatment before, too many times to count. But she also knew better than to escalate the situation. Still, she couldn't shake the burning sense of injustice simmering beneath her calm exterior. The stage was set, and both players stood at the precipice of a confrontation that would unravel in ways neither of them could foresee. The tension lingered in the air long after Greg Harding's sharp demands echoed through the park. Maya Carter's pulse quickened, though not from fear, she knew exactly how these encounters played out. But this time, the stakes felt different. She wasn't just a civilian being profiled, she was an FBI agent who had dedicated her career to exposing systemic injustices like the one unfolding right in front of her. Greg stood firm, his hands on his hips, his posture screaming authority. Around them, the morning joggers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or keep their distance. The old couple with the golden retriever exchanged uneasy glances before retreating down the trail. A mother hurriedly pushed her stroller away, casting nervous looks over her shoulder. The park, once peaceful, now felt charged, like a brewing storm. "Are we going to have a problem here, or are you going to cooperate?" Greg said, his tone laced with impatience. He wasn't used to people like her challenging him, and it showed. Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice measured. "Officer, I've told you already. I'm here for a jog, just like everyone else. I haven't done anything to warrant this kind of treatment." Greg's smirk deepened, the condescension dripping from his every word. "Listen, lady, I don't care what you think you're doing. I asked for your ID. If you're not carrying it, that's your problem. Now, either you follow my instructions, or I'll take this to the next level. Your choice. Take it to the next level. Maya's voice remained calm, but her eyes locked onto his with a quiet intensity that made him falter for just a moment. Are you threatening me? Greg's posture stiffened. Don't twist my words. I'm giving you a chance to make this easy on yourself. Don't push it. Before Maya could respond, a young man in a hoodie, jogging nearby, stopped and hesitated. Hey, is everything okay here? He asked, his voice tentative but concerned. He glanced at Maya, then at Greg, as if weighing his options. Greg turned on him instantly. This doesn't concern you. Keep moving. The man hesitated, his eyes flickering to Maya. It just looks like she's not doing anything wrong. Maybe you should, I said, keep moving. Greg barked, taking a step toward the man, who flinched and reluctantly jogged away. Maya clenched her fists at her sides, biting back the urge to escalate. She knew she couldn't let this get out of hand, not here, not now. But the humiliation, the unfairness of it all, burned in her chest. You're scaring people, she said, her voice low but firm. Do you even realize what you're doing? Greg sneered, leaning in slightly. What I'm doing, he said, his voice dripping with mockery, is my job. Something you wouldn't understand. Maya narrowed her eyes, her calm exterior cracking just enough to let a flash of her true feelings show. I understand a lot more than you think. The air between them felt electric, charged with the weight of all the unspoken truths Maya wasn't yet ready to reveal. Greg didn't know who he was dealing with, and for now, she let him wallow in his ignorance. But that patience was wearing thin, and Greg's next move would determine just how far this encounter would go. Turn around, Greg ordered, pulling out his radio. I'm detaining you for further questioning. Detaining me? Maya repeated, her voice rising slightly. She couldn't help the incredulous laugh that followed. For what? Running? You're being uncooperative, Greg said, his face reddening. That's reason enough. No, it's not, Maya shot back, her tone sharper now. And you know it. You're making this up as you go because you think you can get away with it. Greg's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Beneath the bravado was frustration, and perhaps even a sliver of doubt. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. I don't have to explain myself to you, he snapped. Turn around and put your hands where I can see them. Maya's breath came faster now, her mind racing. She could feel the eyes of the onlookers, their silent judgment, their hesitation to step in. This was exactly the kind of situation she had worked to dismantle in her career, a power play rooted in bias and intimidation. But here, in this moment, she wasn't an agent. She was just another black woman being targeted. You really want to do this? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Because I promise you, you're making a mistake you won't recover from. Greg scoffed, his confidence returning in full force. Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it? Maya's hand instinctively went to the pocket of her running jacket, but she stopped herself. Not yet. Not here. She needed to let this play out just a little longer, to let Greg dig himself deeper. The onlookers, emboldened by the exchange, began murmuring among themselves. A woman with a smartphone out whispered to her partner, "Are you filming this?" Greg noticed the movement, his eyes narrowing. Hey! No filming. This is official business. But it was too late. The woman held her phone steady, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. This isn't right, she said quietly, her voice trembling but resolute. Greg's hand twitched toward his belt, but before he could act, Maya took a deliberate step forward, her presence commanding. That's enough, she said, her voice ringing with authority. You're out of line. For a split second, Greg hesitated, thrown off by her tone. But he quickly recovered, his arrogance flaring back to life. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her restraint teetering on the edge. She wanted nothing more than to drop the facade, to end this charade with a single, undeniable act. But she held back, knowing that the time wasn't right. Not yet. Greg's radio crackled, breaking the tense silence. A voice on the other end called his name, asking for a status update. He ignored it, his focus locked on Maya. "Turn around," he repeated, his voice hard. "This is your last warning." Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "No," she said simply. The word hung in the air, defiant and unyielding. The crowd, now larger, watched with bated breath, their collective anticipation thickening the air. Something was about to happen, something big. And though no one could predict exactly what, they couldn't look away. Greg's face twisted with frustration, his grip on the situation slipping. And Maya, standing tall and resolute, prepared herself for the moment she would finally reveal the truth. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. The crowd had grown, and so had the tension. The park, once serene, now felt like the setting of a brewing storm. Officer Greg Harding's knuckles were white as he gripped the handle of his belt, his jaw set in determination. Across from him, Special Agent Maya Carter stood unwavering, her calm demeanor masking a simmering fury beneath the surface. She could feel the weight of every eye on them, the collective anticipation of what was about to unfold. "Turn around." Greg barked again, his voice trembling slightly, betraying his growing unease. "I won't say it again." Maya's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "You've been saying that for 5 minutes, officer," she replied evenly. "You're not in control here, and you're starting to realize it." Her words hit like a slap. Greg's face turned red, and he stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. "I said turn around," he shouted, his voice louder now, desperation creeping in. "I'd think very carefully about your next move," Maya said, her tone sharper this time, cutting through his bluster like a knife. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Even the woman holding her phone lowered it slightly, caught in the gravity of the moment. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Greg snapped, trying to reclaim the authority he felt slipping away. He reached for the cuffs on his belt, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Maya's eyes locked onto his. For the first time, there was no mask, no restraint. There was only unflinching resolve. "It means you're making the biggest mistake of your life," she said. Then, slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket, every movement deliberate. The crowd gasped, and Greg's hand shot to his holster. "Don't you dare," he barked, his voice cracking. Maya froze, holding her hands up, showing she was unarmed. "Relax, Officer Harding," she said. "I'm just reaching for my badge." Greg blinked, his mind scrambling to process her words. "Your badge," he repeated, confusion breaking through his anger. Maya pulled out her FBI badge and held it up for everyone to see. The polished gold glinted in the sunlight, the letters clear and unmistakable. The murmurs of the crowd erupted into full-blown whispers and gasps. Greg's face drained of color. His eyes darted from the badge to Maya's face, then to the crowd, which now watched with renewed interest. What is this?" he stammered, his bravado crumbling. "This," Maya said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "is the authority you're trying to abuse. I'm Special Agent Maya Carter with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you," she stepped closer, her words like daggers, "are officially out of your depth." Greg took a stumbling step back, his mind racing. He looked at the badge again, as though hoping it was a trick. "FBI?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," Maya said, her voice steady and commanding. "And I've been watching officers like you my entire career. Men who think the badge gives them the right to intimidate, to discriminate, to act like they're untouchable." She took another step forward, forcing him to meet her gaze. But here's the thing, Officer Harding. You're not untouchable. You're accountable. And now, you're going to answer for what you've done. The weight of her words settled over Greg like a lead blanket. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The crowd, once a silent audience, now buzzed with disbelief and outrage. The woman with the phone began recording again, capturing every detail of Greg's unraveling. You think you can just pull this? Greg finally spat, his voice trembling. You think you're going to ruin my career over this? Maya raised an eyebrow. You're ruining your own career, officer. I'm just here to make sure it's documented. She turned slightly, addressing the crowd. And it seems like plenty of witnesses are willing to help. Greg's head snapped toward the onlookers, who immediately avoided his gaze. He felt cornered, exposed, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. You don't know who you're messing with, he said, his voice lower now, desperate. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Maya said, her tone icy. I've seen your kind before. And I know how this ends. Greg's radio crackled to life again, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the tension. Unit 47, report your status. Greg didn't answer. His hand hovered over the radio, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. Maya took a step back, crossing her arms as she watched him struggle to regain control. What's it going to be, officer? She asked. Are you going to keep digging this hole, or are you ready to face the consequences? Greg's eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Maya. He was out of moves, and he knew it. But he couldn't bring himself to surrender, not here, not like this. You're bluffing, he said weakly, though the words carried no conviction. Maya smiled, but it was cold, devoid of any humor. Am I? She said, pulling out her phone. She tapped a few buttons and turned the screen toward him. It displayed a live call, her supervisor at the FBI. The name and number were clear. Go ahead, she said. Make your move. Greg stared at the phone, his face a mask of defeat. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the realization dawned on him, he had lost. The badge, the uniform, the authority he had wielded so recklessly, it meant nothing now. The crowd erupted into murmurs again, some shouting words of support for Maya, others condemning Greg outright. He stumbled back, his hand falling limply to his side. Maya stepped closer, her voice low enough for only him to hear. This isn't over, Harding, she said. Not by a long shot. You've got a lot to answer for. And trust me, I'll make sure you do. Greg didn't respond. He couldn't. The man who had started this encounter so full of arrogance and power now stood broken, a shadow of the figure he had tried to project. Maya turned to the crowd, lifting her badge once more. Thank you all for your support, she said firmly. If any of you recorded what happened here, please hold on to it. We'll need it. The woman with the phone nodded eagerly, her face lit with determination. You've got it, Agent. Maya nodded, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her stern exterior. But she didn't linger. There was still work to be done, and she wouldn't rest until justice was served. As she walked away, the crowd parted, their eyes following her in awe. Behind her, Greg Harding stood alone, his world crashing down around him. And this was just the beginning. Greg Harding stood frozen, his badge suddenly feeling heavier than it ever had before. Around him, the murmurs of the crowd intensified, their collective judgment forming an invisible wall of condemnation. He wasn't used to this. He was the one who gave orders, the one who dictated the narrative. But now, everything had flipped. He was no longer in control, and the realization left him paralyzed. Maya Carter, calm but resolute, began to walk away. She knew the next steps. This wasn't just about one bad officer, it was about a system that allowed men like him to thrive. But as she moved, Greg found his voice again, though it came out rough, desperate. Wait, he called after her, his tone laced with equal parts anger and fear. You don't get to just walk away from this. Maya stopped mid-step and turned slowly, her expression unreadable. The crowd hushed, sensing that the confrontation wasn't over yet. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying a dangerous calm. What exactly do you think I'm walking away from? Greg's hands twitched at his sides, his jaw clenching as he searched for something, anything, to say that would put him back in control. You think you can ruin me? You think this little show is going to? This isn't a show, Maya interrupted, her voice cutting through his like a blade. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them once again. This is accountability, Harding. Something you've clearly never had to face. Greg flinched at her words, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. You don't know me, he spat, his voice trembling. You don't know what I've been through. Maya's eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, pity, maybe, or curiosity. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. You're right, she said. I don't know you. But I know men like you. Men who think the badge gives them the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't. Men who use their authority to intimidate, to oppress, to humiliate. And I've spent my entire career making sure they face the consequences of their actions. Her words landed like a hammer, each one stripping away another layer of Greg's defenses. He opened his mouth to respond, but Maya wasn't done. You've been hiding behind that uniform for years, she continued, her voice steady and relentless. But the uniform doesn't make you untouchable. It doesn't make you right. It doesn't protect you from the truth. And the truth is, you've been abusing your power. And now, you're going to answer for it. The crowd murmured in agreement, their eyes locked on Greg. He looked around, his face pale, his bravado slipping further with every second. He was trapped, and he knew it. Why are you doing this? He asked finally, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. What do you want from me? Maya tilted her head slightly, studying him. For the first time, she allowed a small, bitter smile to cross her lips. What do I want? She repeated. I want justice. I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to have someone strip away your dignity for no reason other than the color of your skin. Greg's eyes widened, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but the weight of her gaze silenced him. This isn't just about you, Harding, Maya continued, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. This is about every person you've ever made feel small. Every person you've ever targeted because they didn't fit into your narrow idea of who belongs. This is about making sure you never do it again. Greg looked away, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The crowd watched in silence, their faces a mix of anger, awe, and something close to satisfaction. The mighty had fallen, and they were witnessing it firsthand. Maya took a step back, letting her words hang in the air. She didn't need to say anything else. The damage was done, and Greg knew it. But just as she turned to leave again, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Maya paused, her back still to him. Slowly, she turned her head, her expression unreadable. What did you mean, then? She asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. Greg hesitated, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know anymore. For a moment, there was silence. Maya studied him, her sharp eyes searching his face for any sign of sincerity. She found it, not much, but enough to give her pause. You've got a long road ahead of you, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. If you're serious about changing, it starts with owning what you've done. All of it. Greg nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. I don't even know where to start. Maya's expression softened, just slightly. Start by listening, she said. To the people you've hurt. to the voices you've ignored. And then, do better. She turned and began to walk away again, this time without hesitation. The crowd parted for her, their murmurs subdued now, respectful. Greg stood alone, his head bowed, the weight of his actions finally settling on his shoulders. As Maya left the park, she felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction, yes, but also a deep weariness. This was just one battle in a much larger war, and she knew it. But for now, it was enough. Justice had been served, and the fight would continue. The park slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Joggers resumed their runs, parents called to their children, and the faint chatter of a community waking up filled the air. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation between Officer Greg Harding and Special Agent Maya Carter, the normalcy felt like a thin veneer. The weight of what they had seen lingered, stirring emotions and questions they couldn't yet articulate. For Greg, the silence was unbearable. He stood by his patrol car, his back turned to the dispersing crowd, the radio on his shoulder crackling with unanswered calls. His mind replayed every second of the encounter, the words Maya had thrown at him cutting deeper now that the adrenaline had worn off. Each accusation echoed in his head, louder than the last. You've been hiding behind that uniform for years. This is about every person you've ever made feel small. Start by listening. Greg clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of the car door. He had thought himself untouchable, a man who controlled his world with authority and intimidation. But now, he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced before. The badge that once empowered him now felt like a mark of shame. Across town, Maya sat in the quiet of her office at the FBI field office. The blinds were half drawn, and the late morning sunlight streamed in, casting long shadows on her desk. The events of the morning had unfolded exactly as she anticipated, but the emotional toll surprised her. She had faced plenty of men like Greg Harding, some worse, some savvier, but this encounter felt different. She reached for her phone and began scrolling through the videos that had already surfaced online. The confrontation was trending on social media, the hashtags #AccountabilityNow and #JusticeForAll flooding her feed. Clips of her holding up her badge, her sharp rebuke of Greg, and his defeated expression were being dissected by commentators, activists, and everyday people alike. The comments were a mix of praise and vitriol. For every message thanking her for standing up to abuse of power, there was another accusing her of going too far, of humiliating a man who was just doing his job. A knock at her door broke her focus. Maya looked up to see her supervisor, Special Agent in Charge James Porter, standing in the doorway. Porter was in his late 50s, his gray hair a stark contrast to his sharp black suit. He was a mentor to Maya, one of the few people in the bureau she truly trusted. "You've been busy," Porter said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Maya set her phone down and leaned back in her chair. "You could say that." Porter folded his arms, studying her. "It's all over the news. They're calling you a hero." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Not everyone." Porter sighed, taking a seat across from her. "You knew this would stir up controversy." "I did," Maya admitted. "But it wasn't about creating a spectacle. That officer needed to be held accountable, and I wasn't about to let him walk away without facing the consequences." Porter nodded slowly. "I agree. But you also need to think about what comes next. This isn't just about Greg Harding anymore. It's about the system that allowed him to behave that way in the first place. And now, the spotlight's on you." Maya tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You think I overstepped?" "No," Porter said firmly. "But others will. The department's already received calls from city officials, the police union, even a couple of senators. They're questioning our involvement." Maya let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. They're not questioning Greg's actions, just mine." Porter leaned forward, his expression serious. "You've rattled the cage, Maya. And that's a good thing. But it also means you need to be prepared for the fallout. Maya met his gaze, her resolve hardening. I've been prepared for this my whole career. Porter smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I know. Just remember, this isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. Meanwhile, Greg sat alone in the locker room of the precinct, the fluorescent lights casting an unforgiving glare on the dull gray walls. His uniform was crumpled on the bench beside him, and for the first time in years, he felt exposed without it. The precinct buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. He knew what they were saying. They had seen the videos too, watched him be brought down in front of a crowd. Some were likely reveling in his downfall, while others were scrambling to distance themselves from him. Greg stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The man looking back at him seemed unfamiliar, tired, defeated, unsure of himself. He had spent years building an identity around authority and control, but now it felt like a hollow shell. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Detective Maria Alvarez, one of the few colleagues he respected, stepped inside. She was sharp, no-nonsense, and one of the best detectives on the force. Greg, she said, her voice neutral but firm. Chief wants to see you. Greg nodded silently, grabbing his uniform jacket but not putting it on. As they walked toward the chief's office, the murmurs grew louder. He could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment. When they reached the office, Chief Donnelly was waiting. The chief was a grizzled veteran with decades of experience, his expression unreadable as Greg stepped inside. Sit, Donnelly said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. Greg obeyed, his movements stiff. Donnelly leaned back in his chair, studying him for a long moment. Greg, we've got a problem, Donnelly said finally. Greg looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. I know. No, I don't think you do, Donnelly said, his tone sharp. This isn't just about you. This is about the entire department. Your actions have put us under a microscope, and I've got people breathing down my neck demanding answers. Greg's stomach twisted. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean to. Donnelly scoffed. That's not good enough. You crossed a line, Greg. And now we're all paying the price. Greg's chest tightened. What happens now? Donnelly sighed, leaning forward. You're suspended, effective immediately. Internal Affairs is launching a full investigation, and depending on what they find, you might be facing more than just disciplinary action. Greg nodded numbly. He had expected this, but hearing it aloud made it real. You brought this on yourself, Donnelly said, his voice softer now. I don't know what you were thinking out there, but it's clear you lost sight of what this badge stands for. Greg didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of his actions was finally settling on his shoulders, and for the first time, he didn't have an excuse or justification to fall back on. As he left the office, the precinct felt colder, emptier. He was a man without purpose, stripped of the identity he had clung to for so long. And for the first time in years, Greg Harding felt truly powerless. Greg Harding sat alone on the worn leather couch in his dimly lit apartment. The blinds were drawn, leaving the room bathed in shadows. His uniform, once a source of pride, hung on the back of a chair, a stark reminder of the power he no longer wielded. The echoes of the day haunted him, the sharp authority in Maya's voice, the murmurs of the crowd, the humiliation etched into every second of their confrontation. He picked up his phone hesitantly, scrolling through the news feeds. Every major outlet carried the story, accompanied by videos that painted him as the villain he had spent years pretending he wasn't. The captions varied, but the message was clear: FBI agent exposes police misconduct in public confrontation. The comments below each article were brutal. Strangers dissected his actions, his career, even his appearance. This guy should have been fired years ago. Another bully with a badge finally gets what's coming to him. Accountability is long overdue. Greg's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. The rage bubbled up, but there was nowhere for it to go. He couldn't lash out this time. He couldn't use his badge to silence his critics. He was left with nothing but the truth he'd spent years avoiding. He had brought this on himself. A knock at the door startled him, breaking his spiraling thoughts. He hesitated before getting up, his steps slow and heavy. When he opened the door, he found Detective Maria Alvarez standing there, her expression unreadable. "Maria," he said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her sharp eyes scanning the cluttered apartment. "I figured you'd be here, drowning in your misery," she said, her tone neither harsh nor sympathetic. Greg shut the door and leaned against it, his shoulders slumping. "I guess you came to rub it in." Maria turned to face him, her arms crossed. "No, Greg. I came because you need to hear the truth, and I'm probably the only one who's going to tell it to you." Greg let out a bitter laugh. "Great. Another lecture. Go ahead, tell me how I screwed up." Maria stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "You didn't just screw up, Greg. You've been screwing up for years. Today was just the first time someone called you out in a way you couldn't ignore." He looked away, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Didn't mean to." Maria's voice sharpened. "That's your excuse. You didn't mean to profile her. You didn't mean to use your position to intimidate her. Come on, Greg. You're better than that." "Am I?" he shot back, his voice rising. "Because right now, I feel like a damn failure." Maria's gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained steady. "You're not a failure, Greg. But you've lost your way. And if you don't figure out how to fix it, you will be." Greg sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I don't even know where to start." Maria sat down across from him, her voice gentler now. "You start by facing the truth. Not just about what you did today, but about who you've become. When did you start thinking the badge gave you the right to act like this?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken regrets. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "You think I wanted to be this guy? I didn't sign up for this to hurt people. Then why did you?" Maria pressed. "What were you trying to prove?" Greg opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. The truth lingered on the edge of his thoughts, something he had avoided confronting for years. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to matter. I wanted people to respect me." Maria leaned back, her expression softening. "Respect doesn't come from fear, Greg. It comes from integrity. From doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Greg's shoulders sagged further, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can fix this." "You don't have a choice," Maria said firmly. "You owe it to yourself, and to every person you've hurt, to try." Across town, Maya Carter sat at a small cafe, her laptop open in front of her. She was reviewing reports from her latest cases, but her mind kept drifting back to the morning's events. The confrontation with Greg had been a long time coming, but now that it was over, she couldn't shake the lingering unease. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from her brother, Marcus. "Saw the video. Proud of you. But be careful. People like him don't change easily." Maya sighed, typing a quick response. "Thanks. I know." The truth was, she wasn't sure what to expect from Greg Harding. Men like him didn't often reflect on their actions or seek redemption. But there had been something in his eyes during their confrontation, a flicker of shame, perhaps even regret. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her pause. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her supervisor, James Porter. He slid into the seat across from her, a cup of coffee in hand. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said, his tone light but concerned. Maya managed a small smile. "Just processing." Porter nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "You did good today, Maya. But I know you. You're thinking about what comes next." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I am. Because this can't just be about one officer. It's about the entire system that lets people like him thrive." Porter leaned forward, his expression serious. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Maya met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I'm going to make sure this isn't swept under the rug. Greg Harding isn't the first, and he won't be the last. But if we can hold him accountable, maybe it'll set a precedent." Porter smiled faintly. "You're relentless, you know that." She smirked. "You taught me well." The next day, Greg found himself sitting in a mandatory counseling session, a condition of his suspension. The counselor, a middle-aged black woman named Dr. Elaine Harper, greeted him with a warm but professional smile. "Mr. Harding," she said, motioning for him to sit. "I understand you've had a difficult few days." Greg sat down reluctantly, his arms crossed. "You could say that." Dr. Harper studied him for a moment before speaking. "Why don't you start by telling me what happened?" He hesitated, his defenses rising instinctively. "You've seen the news. You know what happened." "I know what the news says," Dr. Harper replied calmly. "I want to know what you think happened." Greg frowned, his gaze dropping to the floor. I lost control. I let my anger get the better of me." "And why do you think that is?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Greg struggled to find the words. "I don't know. Maybe I've been angry for a long time." Dr. Harper leaned forward slightly. "Angry at what?" He paused, his jaw tightening. "At the world. At the way everything feels stacked against me." Dr. Harper's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "And you think that justifies taking it out on others?" "No," Greg said quickly, his voice filled with regret. "No, it doesn't. I know that." "Then why do you keep doing it?" she pressed. Greg looked up, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time, the walls he had built around himself began to crack. "Because I didn't know how else to deal with it." Dr. Harper nodded slowly. "That's a start. Admitting there's a problem is the first step. But now, you need to figure out how to change." Greg's voice wavered. "I don't know if I can." Dr. Harper's gaze softened. "You can. But it's going to take time, and a lot of hard work." Greg nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, however faint. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that weighs heavy, filled with the unspoken tension of justice waiting to unfold. Greg Harding sat at the defense table, his posture stiff, his face pale. This was the final step in a process that had unraveled his life and forced him to confront his failures. The trial had been grueling, weeks of testimony, character witnesses, and damning evidence brought forth by Maya Carter and her team. Now, all that remained was the verdict. Across the room, Maya sat with her colleagues, her expression composed but alert. She had worked tirelessly to ensure this case was airtight. This wasn't just about Greg, it was about holding a system accountable, about setting a precedent that no badge placed anyone above the law. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out as the judge entered. Everyone stood, the tension in the room palpable. Greg's heart pounded as he clenched his fists under the table, bracing for what was to come. The judge took her seat, her eyes scanning the courtroom. After careful deliberation, the jury has reached a unanimous decision. Greg held his breath. He felt the weight of every eye in the room on him, and for the first time, he didn't care. He just wanted it to be over. On the charge of misconduct under color of law, the judge said, her voice steady, the defendant is found guilty. A collective exhale rippled through the room. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a brief sense of relief. Justice had been served. Greg slumped in his chair, the reality of his actions crashing down on him in full force. The judge continued. Officer Harding, your abuse of power has caused harm not only to the individuals you targeted but to the trust the public places in law enforcement. You are hereby sentenced to 2 years of community service and mandatory rehabilitation training, with a permanent revocation of your law enforcement credentials. The sentence wasn't harsh compared to what others might have wanted, but Maya knew it was significant. It meant Greg Harding would never again hold a position of authority over others. It was accountability in action, a step toward dismantling the unchecked power that allowed abuse to thrive. As the courtroom emptied, Greg lingered, his mind racing. Maria Alvarez approached him, her expression neutral. It's over, she said simply. Greg nodded slowly. Not for me, he murmured. This is just the beginning. Maria studied him for a moment before speaking. Then make it count. You've been given a second chance, not everyone gets that. Greg didn't respond, but her words lingered as he left the courtroom. Months later, Greg found himself standing in a community center, surrounded by the very people he had once ignored or mistreated. As part of his sentence, he was required to speak at local forums about the dangers of bias in law enforcement. Each session was painful, forcing him to confront the harm he had caused, but it was also transformative. He began to listen, truly listen, to the stories of those he had wronged. For the first time, he saw them not as threats, but as individuals, each with a life as complex and valuable as his own. One day, after a particularly emotional session, an older man approached him. You can't undo the past, the man said, his voice kind but firm. But you can make sure your future counts for something. Don't waste it. Greg nodded, his throat tight. He was far from redemption, but he was beginning to understand what it looked like. For Maya, the victory in Greg's case was just the beginning. The visibility of the trial had sparked conversations across the nation, leading to new policies and mandatory training in law enforcement agencies. Her work became more demanding than ever, but it also felt more meaningful. One evening, as she prepared to leave her office, she received a message from her brother Marcus. It was a short video of a protest outside City Hall, with hundreds of people chanting for justice and reform. The caption read, "Because of you." Maya smiled faintly, the weight of the day lifting slightly. She knew the fight wasn't over, but moments like this reminded her why she kept going. Her resilience wasn't just for herself, it was for everyone who needed someone to stand up for them. Years later, Greg and Maya crossed paths again, this time at a public panel on police reform. Greg had become an advocate, using his story as a cautionary tale to push for accountability and systemic change. Maya was there as a guest speaker, her reputation as a relentless fighter for justice preceding her. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding. They were on different paths, but both were working toward the same goal, a system where fairness and justice prevailed over prejudice and power. After the panel, Greg approached Maya hesitantly. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Maya turned to him, her expression guarded but not unkind. "Harding. I just wanted to say, thank you," he said. "For holding me accountable. I didn't see it then, but you gave me a chance to change." Maya studied him for a moment before nodding. "Accountability isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about making sure the harm stops here. If you're serious about change, keep proving it." Greg nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes.